Just yesterday, I got an email from a group in Turkey of esoteric occultists who love my work and think that I am giving them the proper credit for women's liberation that they don't often get. I know it's so funny, but I have witches and Satanists who are big fans of my book because they're like, yes, she's right, that we deserve the credit for abortion, for breaking up the family. Like, this is all we wanted to do this. This was the goal. I'm not some crazy religious lady out here telling you everything's the devil like Bobby Boucher's mom and the water boy. I'm just telling you what they say. And what they say is, yes, we wanted to destroy the family because it's patriarchal. Yes, we wanted abortion on demand without any restriction. Yes, we want depopulation. We want women to have power through, you know, destroying men's seed when and where they see fit. Women get to decide if and when a man gets to have a child, and that's the source of their power. And they think that not just politically, but spiritually. It's both.
This is Jonathan Pedro. Welcome to the Symbolic World. Hello, everyone. I'm here with Rachel Wilson. I imagine that most people that are watching this know who Rachel is. She has written a book on occult feminism, but she is also quite active online in the debate space. You know, some know her husband is Andrew Wilson, and both of them are kind of like a tag team debaters on X and on the different platforms. But, you know, Rachel and I, we ended up meeting with her husband and a bunch of people in Dallas, and we thought it would be a good idea to talk about her book, but then also about, you know, the trick that the modern world has played on us with feminism and the beauty also of motherhood and being a wife and being a woman in general. And so, Rachel, thanks for talking to me.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on, Jonathan. It was so great meeting you, and this is the kind of show I really like to do, so I was very excited that you wanted to talk to me, so thank you.
Well, of course. Well, because one of the things on my channel, I think in the same way you do with another tack, is I've also noticed that there's something about the modern world which is actually anti-feminine, and that in the feminist movement is actually a trick there because it's actually anti-feminine. It's like tricking women into believing that they should be men. And so I spent a lot of time trying to help people see the beauty of feminine symbolism in scripture, in the tradition. And so when I saw what you were doing, I thought this is exactly the case. But the thing that really wowed me a little bit is your book, where you trace let's say, the origins of feminism to occult practices. So maybe we can start with that. Tell us a little bit what that's about.
Yeah, well, when I started writing the book, I didn't think that's where it would lead. I thought I was going to be writing mostly about the funding of the 19th Amendment and the industrialist progressive era folks who kind of pushed all that stuff to the forefront and funded the first wave, right? And as I was going through and doing research, which I took 2.5 years, and kind of meticulously profiled the lives of most of the big players involved, and even some of the lesser known but very influential writers of the time, that was kind of my way of going about it was, let's go back and read what people were writing in the late 1700s, in the early 1800s, when this started. What was their mindset? Where were they coming from? Where did they get these ideas, and why did they think they were important? I really wanted to understand the mind of those people. So I read a lot of their own writings, their autobiographies and their biographies, and I kept noticing this thread time after time after time, that almost all of these influential women, and even the men who were around them, had dabbled in some type of occult practice, whether it was straight up Luciferianism, whether it was theosophy, spiritualism. There were a lot of different utopian cults that emerged out of the Second Great Awakening in America, and there was a lot of thoughts that came from that camp. And I remember going to Andrew and saying, this is crazy. I've got to, like, this has to be the theme because it's the one thread that I'm finding through all these women. There was two things that almost all of them had in common. One was the occult practice stuff, and the other was abandoning their family. Almost all these women, there was a few that didn't, but a lot of them would abandon their husband and children to pursue this activism, even in the 1800s, which I thought was pretty crazy.
So are you telling me that witches are real? Is that what you're saying, Rachel?
Yes. So, like, what a good example would be Matilda Joslyn Gage. She was very active in the suffragette movement. She helped write the Woman's Bible, and she had a very influential work called Woman, Church, and State. And she was extremely anti-Christian. Thought Christianity was the mechanism for enslavement of women for all of human history. And she happened to be the mother-in-law of L. Frank Baum, who wrote The Wizard of Oz and popularized the idea of the Good Witch.
And so she was in the Theosophical Society, I imagine, just like Baum. All right, interesting.
That's how he got into that stuff. He lived with her for quite a while with his wife.
Oh, he got in it through her.
Yes. Yeah. And he was very, very much influenced by her. They were very close. They lived together for several years. And she kind of got him. She spent a lot of time with like Iroquois Indians too, and studying kind of the Iroquois pagan religions. And she thought those were great. And Theosophy is nice because it's kind of like a choose your own buffet of, occult spirituality. You can kind of pick and choose from all the different things.
Yeah, it's like proto-New Age, really. The New Age movement comes kind of straight out of Theosophy and does what Theosophy doesn't do, which is decentralizes it, makes it just pick and choose whatever you want. Yeah,
yes, exactly. Yeah, I called it proto-New Age, I think, in the book.
Oh, you did call it that. There you go.
Yeah, yeah.
Definitely.
And Baum that's where he got the idea of the Good Witch, because up until then, there was no such thing. But we see that carry through the whole 20th century. Like, if you want to talk about symbolism, we have The Wizard of Oz at the beginning of the 20th century as a very popular book with Glinda the Good Witch. And then we have sitcoms coming out later in the 60s like Bewitched.
Yeah.
And this idea of the Good Witch was based on Matilda Joslyn Gage and her hatred for Christianity that she was not shy about. I mean, she was one of the, major voices for separation of church and state, and this idea that church and state are opposed to one another and should have nothing to do with each other, and that Christianity was just a tool for oppression. So pretty surprising.
Is she one of those people that abandoned her family?
Kind of. I think she ended up divorced. And she advocated early on for abortion as a like ritual. So I don't know if maybe
as a ritual?
Yes, like a lot of the pagan religions. In fact, when they overturned Roe v. Wade, there were a lot of Native American associations and groups that protested it based on their idea that abortion is a religious right. So this is like a common thing. New Zealand, same thing. Pagan New Zealand, like indigenous religions, believe that abortion can be ritualized and used for magic purposes. And so based on the freedom of religion clause in the US Constitution, a lot of Native American groups opposed the overturn of Roe v. Wade, and they said, abortion is a sacrament for us. You can't outlaw it. And she was early on got that idea from the Iroquois and was writing about it, in the 1800s in America.
That's wild. And so what do you remember what it is that she thought it would do? Like what kind of effect, what did the ritual bring about?
Well, they had this idea that, in Native American religion, not all, there's so many and there's a lot of diversity, but one thread they have in common is they do have this idea, like most other religions. It's not patriarchal. It tends to be where you have a strong female spiritual side, you have goddesses. And so female empowerment in the spiritual sense is really important to them. And women don't have a monopoly on physical force, but they do have a monopoly on reproduction. And they think that it's like a sacred thing for women to be able to decide who gets born and when those people get born. And that if for any reason, the woman doesn't want to do that or thinks, it could be anything from like they think the child is cursed or something like that. They may abort it. If they think that it needs to be a sacrifice to the gods because there was a bad harvest, maybe we need to use ritual abortion in that case. There were a lot of different ideas that people had about it, I guess, but Gage in particular wrote about it as this beautiful idea of women's empowerment and a way for women to take control back, for them to have a sense of power in society by deciding, who and when anyone gets born, I guess.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So for her, there was some kind of occult aspect to it, but it was also very political. Like it was a
Yes.
political gesture, basically. You know,
Yes.
and we see this obviously now. We obviously see this has become the crux of a lot of the abortion movement, is to represent it as a form of power, right? And
Yes.
the women that brag about their abortions and are kind of proud about them, you can feel that what they're saying is, I'm in control. You know, you can't. And I'm showing this to the world, right, by
Yes.
killing my children.
Yes. In
Wow.
fact, I came up with a question. This is my original argument that I came up with a few years ago debating this topic. I came up with a hypothetical based on, you'll often see reports in the news, oh, we're about to have artificial wombs. You know, in the next 10 years, we will have artificial wombs and children can be born in labs. I don't think that's going to happen, but let's pretend that it did. And this is what I'll ask people who are pro-choice. I'll say, let's say we get these artificial wombs and, you know, a woman has a pregnancy that she doesn't want. She goes into an abortion clinic and they say, good news. We now have the technology to remove this baby, put it in an artificial womb. We don't have to kill it, and it can grow and gestate fully and be born, and it can be adopted by couples who are on a waiting list waiting for newborns. So you will have no legal obligation to it. You won't have any sort of obligation to it. It will remove it from you, but it doesn't have to die.
Mm-hmm.
I ask them in that case, do you think that abortion, in the sense that it's practiced now where the fetus dies, do you think that that should be illegal at that point? In other words, if you have the option to
Mm-hmm.
not be pregnant and not be a mother, but the baby doesn't have to be killed in order for that to happen, do you still think that they should have the right to do it? And every single one so far has told me, yes, they should still have the right to kill it. So what that proves to me is abortion is not about, women having a right to choose where they go in life or decide when they become mothers, like a lot of the fluffy language that we've been told for decades, the safe, legal, and rare stuff that Bill Clinton was talking about in the
Mm-hmm.
90s. Now it has shifted completely to just saying, no, if we want to kill babies, we're going to kill babies, and you can't tell us not to, even if there was an alternative option.
Yeah, exactly. And so this is really interesting to me because one of the things that I had noticed, and so I don't know if you've ever read The Hammer of Witches. It's a
Yes.
late. You have read The Hammer of Witches.
I have it in this bookshelf right back here.
All right. And it was very mysterious to me how the modern witches, you know, like the ones that you see on TV, all these new covens and everything,
Yeah.
how they seem to be consciously wanting to be the witches that were being accused in the Middle Ages, that they're taking on the tropes of those witches. You know, and in the Malleus, it's exactly what you're saying. Basically, the idea is that the witches, they, out of a kind of resentment, out of kind of anger, they want to, you know, to castrate the male, to kill the children, to prevent reproduction, to prevent an actual reproduction act, you know, and obviously there's the whole weird incubus succubus kind of relationship. You know, and my intuition was that all of this is happening now, like especially the incubus succubus one is the one that's the weirdest, because when you read it in the text, you're like, okay, so the succubus takes the seed of the man and gives it to the incubus who impregnates another woman. You're like, what the hell are we talking about?
Yeah.
And then when you read it now, you're like, oh, that's a fertility clinic.
Basically,
That's
yes.
literally a
Yes.
fertility clinic where you take the seed of the man, you know, and then a succubus, like literally an image of a woman, takes the seed of a man and then gives it to a woman so that she can have a child from a man that's not her husband, you know, and it's like, wow, that's wild.
Yeah. The other thing about it is, if you go back to ancient myths like Lilith, I mean, Lilith was a demon who, they had all kinds of warding against Lilith in like the old Jewish traditions, because Lilith would come and kill newborns or harm them or curse them or steal them. And a lot of the witches that were persecuted, I'm not saying that there weren't witch hunts that went horribly wrong. I'm not saying there weren't people who were innocent victims. Surely there were. But a lot of witch hunts were valid from the perspective that some of these people were the ones who were purveyors of abortion and poisonings and things like that. Witches, that was how they made a living, essentially, for a lot of history, especially in places like Europe, you can find tons of documentation of witches. Like Lavoisin was a French witch, a very prolific murderer who sold poison to a lot of the aristocracy to kill off their rivals and things like that. And they would provide herbal abortion remedies or perform, surgical abortion and things like that. So this idea that witches were just minding their own business, having orgies in the forest is kind of a modern thing. And if you go back and look, there's a current witch scholar I cite in my book. She's a third generation witch herself, teaches at a university about the history of witchcraft, and says herself that yes, witches were oppressed because they were the ones, delivering abortions to people and letting them, have freedom. This is the only freedom feminism really cares about is abortion. That's it. Women can have everything else. They can have every right a man has. They can have every privilege over a man. It will never be enough unless they can have abortion with zero limits. That's their only metric by which they measure women's liberation.
Okay. All right. I have to admit that I haven't really thought about that too much. I grew up in a very Christian world, and so my contact with abortion has been somewhat limited. All I can see the stats and I can see the numbers. I probably don't know that many people that if they've had an abortion, they're definitely not talking about it. Like they might be keeping it secret. It's not something that they put out there in the forefront, And so tell me a little bit about the reaction to your book, because what's interesting about what you're saying is that
this is Sarah from Hamilton. The imagery of Isaiah is overwhelming. Fire, stone, seed, life and death. What does it have to do with Christ? Join me for my course, The Fifth Gospel, to discover how to read Isaiah in terms of its native language, symbolism. When we read that language along the textual structure of the book, we find the story of Christ, the God who became man to elevate man to divine glory. And we find that story both in Isaiah's most famous passages and in his most obscure ones. The course starts on June 15th and can be attended live or at your convenience. I hope to see you there.
When you talk about this witch that's a scholar, right, you're actually providing things that they're saying themselves. Like it's like you're not misrepresenting. You're representing accurately what they themselves are saying about themselves.
Yes.
And so I'm a little curious about what the reaction is.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because just yesterday I got an email from a group in Turkey of esoteric occultists who love my work and think that I am giving them the proper credit for women's liberation that they don't often get. I have I know, it's so funny, but I have witches and Satanists who are big fans of my book because they're like, yes, she's right, that we deserve the credit for abortion, for breaking up the family. Like, this is all, we wanted to do this. This was the goal. I'm not some crazy religious lady out here telling you everything's the devil, like Bobby Boucher's mom and the water boy. I'm just telling you what they say. And what they say is, yes, we wanted to destroy the family because it's patriarchal. Yes, we wanted abortion on demand without any restriction. Yes, we want depopulation. We want women to have power through, destroying men's seed when and where they see fit. Women get to decide if and when a man gets to have a child, and that's the source of their power. And they think that not just politically, but spiritually, it's both. So there's a famous witch called Zuzana Budapest, and she came here from the Czech Republic right after World War II.
It's a good name, though.
Isn't it?
It's a good name for a witch.
She's still around, actually, and she does seances and tarot card readings and stuff like that on Facebook Live. And she was cursing Donald Trump, throughout the last decade, live on Facebook. She was leading a lot of that where the witches were cursing him. She's famous because when she moved here, she was in San Francisco in the 1960s, and she was the one who got the courts to overturn rulings that made witchcraft illegal under the Religious Freedom Clause. And so witchcraft was legalized basically nationwide by the 1970s because of her and because she used these tactics. And in her writings, she said that feminism is the political arm of a spiritual movement that has been with us since human beings have been around. She says
Yeah.
witchcraft is ancient. We've always had it. It's our spiritual lineage, and feminism is just the political arm of witchcraft.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's a very old story because, one of the things that I do is I try to help people see the difference between the biblical vision of the world and the pagan vision. And so in the Greek theogony, right, in Hesiod's theogony, you really have this dynamic, which is that the reason why Mother Earth wants to castrate her husband is because she is giving birth to monsters. And the husband is saying, like, no, he doesn't want monsters in the world. And so she's pushing the monsters back into her, right? Because she's producing freaks, basically. She's like manifesting all these freaks. And he's like, no, we don't want the freaks. Like, we want, and for that reason, she is bitter and she's angry. And so she associates with her son who castrates the father, and that is this image of revolution, right? It's like this understanding that actually succession functions through revolution rather than through actual filiation and lineage in the way that the Christians think about it. So maybe tell me a bit about, because to me, although I kind of get it, but it's mysterious to me, the depopulation part, like the idea that in some way they want to break up the family and they actually want people to stop having children. Something that for me, I just don't like. I see it, but how does this possible?
And it is tough for a lot of people to see, like, why does that connect and where does that connect? And my next book, which is a kind of a follow-up to the first book, and it's going to be out later this year. I'm finally almost done with it. It's been forever, but I have a lot of family stuff that has to come first. It goes over like the Marxist side of feminism in depth, especially Bolshevik Russia, which was like a real hotbed of occultism and feminism. And they had some of the very first, like, really radical feminist laws in Bolshevik Russia. So it covers a ton of that. And you'll see that from that time period to especially in the 60s and 70s in the West, in the United States and the UK in particular, there was a huge goddess worship revival. When everybody was going off on their hippie journeys, the boomers are all hippies in the 60s and 70s, and they're, we have to stick it to the man and fight against the capitalist oppressors and all that stuff. Goddess worship had this huge revival, and we see like Gardner and Wicca emerging out of this same time period. There's a ton of this sort of stuff going on. And in these goddess worship revival circles in the 70s, it was very much like, I did a whole show on this with another streamer, where they had this archetype of Mother Earth, and that human beings are a scourge on the planet because males are inherently violent and destructive. They kill animals, they eat meat, they pollute the planet with their capitalist endeavors. They colonize, right? This male white colonist oppressor versus the Mother Earth, the kind of hippie veganism is very tied in with this. You even see veganism really deeply tied in with all of the socialism and communism stuff, especially like Jay Dyer's talked about this a lot in the like the incremental socialism. The word's escaping me at the moment. It was really big in the UK, the Fabian socialists. Right. Fabian socialism and veganism, like, were very popular together. A lot of the Fabians were very into veganism and, trying to eliminate meat eating and animal husbandry and things like this to save the planet. And this is 100 years ago. So this stuff is not new. We had a lot of vegan utopian cults in America in the 1840s for the same reason. And those same cults experimented with gender swapping, like having the women work in the fields and having the men raise the children. I detail some of those in the 3rd chapter of my book. And none of them lasted more than a year or two. Surprise, surprise. But this idea, and it was in academia, it was popularized by Sandra Harding, who came up with feminist standpoint theory. And she said that we have to understand that the feminine is nurturing, it's life-giving, it's peaceful, and that maleness, to be male, is to be destructive and violent and murderous. And so what we've got to do as women, it's our duty as women to limit the birth rate, to limit how many males are born, to limit male power any way that we can, because men will destroy the earth and women are the only ones who can save it. I'm
And even
paraphrasing
though
a
they
lot
kind
there.
of, I mean, they must have known that without males that we run out of people at some point. You know,
Well,
obviously you need
they
less
had
males than females, like just practically, but like in
they had a
in
plan. They had a
okay,
plan for that.
okay,
So the
please.
plan was to limit the male population to about 10% and have about 90% of the world's population be
But
female.
this is an actual plan.
Yes.
What?
Yeah, this was amongst radical feminist separatists in the 70s who were in these academic circles with Sandra Harding and a bunch of her friends. They actually are the ones who created gender studies and
Uh-huh.
feminist standpoint theory, and the Rockefellers actually funded all this and helped them create it. And the plan was, if we can get the world population down by about 80 to 90% of what it is now, and then limit the male population to about 10%, they theorized we can get rid of meat eating, we can save planet Earth. Now, back in the 70s, we were worried about an ice age, right? The climate alarmism was there, and you had really influential books like The Population Bomb that had everybody convinced that overpopulation was going to be the big scare. Of course, now we have population collapse
Of
upon
course.
us. But in the 70s, it was there's going to be a new ice age if we don't save the planet, and the environmentalist tree huggers trying to like plant trees everywhere and deforestation and stuff. And so they said if we can get the male population down by 90% of what it is now, get them down to about 10%, we'll have enough to keep the human race going, but women can rule everything. Women can run everything, and then we won't have, animal torture, meat eating. We're going to save the environment. There won't be any more wars. Every
Everyone knows
child
that,
who's born will be communally raised. No one will know
everyone
who
knows
their
that women don't
father
have
is.
wars.
Yeah, if you actually look at the history, female leaders are more likely to go to war than male leaders are. So
Yeah.
they're
But
just
also, I mean, just like the idea that women don't have conflict among themselves is pretty silly. I mean, I'm not saying men don't have conflict between themselves, but the idea that if you leave a bunch of women together, that at some point they're all going to get along, it seems like anyone with any human experience knows that that is not necessarily the case.
Well, the problem, you're right. If you had any sense, that would be the conclusion that you would come to. But what Harding and the academic radicals from the 60s and 70s, the reason they developed standpoint theory, if you don't know what that is, feminist standpoint theory is a feminist epistemology. It's a feminist way of determining what truth is. And standpoint theory says there is no objective truth. There's no objective historical timeline. There's no objective truth. There's no objective version of events. And that the most true perspective you can have is as the most oppressed women. This is where all this intersectional postmodernist craziness comes from. And Harding said it would have to be like a woman of color who is a lesbian, who is disabled, like the more of these oppression Olympics badges that you can stack on top of each other, those kinds of people are going to have the most true version of the truth. So she rejected truth. She rejected this idea that there's a truth. So it didn't matter to them when they're coming up with these theories and they're, proposing things like banning meat consumption, imposing population restriction. These are actual public policies they wanted to push for. And things like, single moms, they wanted to subsidize single mothers on purpose. They didn't want men raising children, and they didn't want men to have any rights to children. Ultimately, they wanted children raised communally, and they said daycare is the best way to do that. If all the mothers go to work, all the children are raised communally in a daycare, then we get rid of this patriarchy, we get rid of this family, because that's where you pass down a legacy. Right? If you're a father and you own a business and you're trying to build wealth for your next generation and pass it down, that's where all this evil patriarchy comes from. So they pushed really hard for single moms and children being raised in public schools and daycares, which is exactly what we have now.
Yeah. That's wild because that's exactly what we have now. And you see it. I mean, we have friends, where we are, there are not that many Christians. We have many friends that aren't Christian, women who have children and buy the lie, and then by the time they're in their 30s, they they start to say, what the hell am I doing? But it's too late, because they've bought the whole system, and now they have this mortgage that one salary can't pay. Now they have all of these problems that they can't get out of, and so they're kind of trapped in this misery cycle.
Yeah, and what this did we pushed so many women into the workforce in the 1970s. I think we increased the number of women overall in the workforce by about 25%. And we went from having only about 5% of children of school age having mothers that worked outside the home to now having 45% of children who are school age having mothers who work outside the home. And that happened in just a couple of decades.
Yeah.
And what that did was it created a fundamental change to the economy that has created a two-income trap. So now even a lot of women like me who do want to stay home, raise their kids themselves, it's really tough to do it. It's really tough to do it. And I'm very realistic about that. When I talk about, trying to discourage moms from working, I'm not saying that it's always possible. I think there are ways to work around it. I have some advice I give on how I did that myself and things. But this was all intentional. People think that feminism was like this innocent, well-meaning grassroots movement where women just wanted more choice. That's what you always hear. Oh, feminism just gives women choices. In fact, that's not true. And I do debunk a lot of those. A lot of what I do in debating and things like that is just debunking, first of all, the framing and the arguments that are made. This idea that women had no choices prior to, whatever benchmark you want, the 19th Amendment, the second wave in the 1960s, and the working women and daycare and all this stuff. What feminism has actually done is taken away a lot of choice for women.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to stay home and raise 5 kids, that's really tough to do with the way society is set up now. If you want to get married young and have your family first, and then maybe go to university or do something else when you're older, like I did, that's really tough to do. And the whole entire culture is going to tell you that that's insane. What we do now is we tell women, you have only one choice, that smart girls go to college, they get a degree, they begin a career, and then once they're established in career and have their own money and they're completely independent, then they can start thinking about looking for a husband and maybe having a family.
And freeze their eggs, obviously, because you're in trouble already at that point.
Yeah, but they don't tell you that the success rate of IVF is abysmally low.
Yeah.
It's extremely expensive. It's extremely painful. It's very, there's a lot to go through health-wise if you're going to do IVF. And if you try to do IVF after 40, it has a less than 10% success rate.
Wow. I didn't know
So
that.
a lot of young ladies I talk to tell me this. Like when I go on the Whatever podcast and I'm talking to a group of these, girls that are half my age, they say this. They go, well, I'm going to do all this. I'm going to have my fun and have a career and travel the world and do all this. And then I'll just have IVF when I'm 45. And I'm like, has anyone ever told you that the success rate, you could spend $30,000 and go through 10 cycles and still not get pregnant. And that's a very real possibility. And it's very tough on you. Not to mention the fact that as a mother of 5, I can tell you, staying up all night with toddlers, being pregnant, chasing kids around, that's something you want to do in your 20s. Okay.
Yeah, for all of us, like even dads.
Yeah.
I mean, you can see it. Like, we ended up having 3 children, with a few miscarriages. But as you get older, you can see that you just don't have as much energy, right? And so we even bought the lie to some extent. We started having children, in my opinion, too late. Like I think at around 30, we had our first. And so it was already kind of, but it's like you said, if you start having kids in your 40s, my goodness, it's like it's going to be so much harder than if you have kids in your 20s.
Yeah, it's really tough. And so I always argue, and I have tons of data and statistics. That's kind of my thing, is just knowing and understanding all this stuff, because most people don't. Even a lot of feminist academics don't know a lot of the information that I know. And the only reason is because they go in with a bias. You don't go to university to get a women's studies degree unless you're already bought into feminism as a system and as a movement. And you're going to get the good stuff that they've curated that they want you to know. You're not going to read all the boring older stuff that Rachel's read. You're not going to go through the National Incident Study data, which is the broadest data set we have for things like child abuse, maltreatment of women, and stuff like that, and find that to the extent that we have normalized divorce and normalized, having children out of wedlock and all the things that are going on with the family right now, it has made women far less safe. Not a little less safe, far less safe. For instance, you have a 40% higher chance of experiencing domestic violence as a woman if you are in a live-in with your boyfriend type of relationship, cohabitating relationships, far higher rates of domestic abuse than marriage. All types of maltreatment for children are about 10 to 12 times higher for any situation other than living with your both married biological parents. Like the data is so clear on this. It just blows any notion out of the water that taking dads out of the equation, taking marriage out of the equation makes women and children safer. It doesn't. It shifted the abuse into these other situations where it's actually harder for women to get out. This idea that, feminism protects women from abusive marriage is not borne out in the last 50 years of data whatsoever. It proves the opposite. It's taken women and put them in much more vulnerable positions. And women after divorce are much more likely to experience financial insecurity and subsequently worse relationships. So if you've been married and you get divorced, like your odds for a second or third happy marriage, it's worse and worse.
They're not the cream of the crop,
No. And I say this as somebody who's been through it. I've been a person who, when I was really young, bought into what everyone around me was saying. Even I went to kind of a non-denominational Christian church that told me it's okay to live with your boyfriend. You're in a monogamous, committed relationship. You're gonna get married. It's fine. And I had valid reasons. I came from a very abusive home that I was trying to get away from. And of the two options, that seemed like the smart one to me at the time. However, it did not work out for me, right? And then I did get married. That guy did turn out to be abusive and did leave, and I ended up divorced there. So I've been through all these things myself. I'm not here because I did everything correctly on the first try, got it all right. Rachel's just always been perfect. Absolutely not. I've made a lot of the common mistakes that a lot of women from my generation have made, and can tell you that, these things don't solve your problems. Living with your boyfriend instead of getting married doesn't protect you. And going through divorce and trying to find somebody and remarry is tough. It's hard for everybody. Now we're in a situation where that's what a lot of people are going to have to do. So we have to deal with that. But the ideal should still be the Orthodox Christian ideal of marriage as a sacrament, which most of us in the West have never even heard of, because we're only 1% to 2% of us are Orthodox. And even the Roman Catholics now don't take this sacrament of marriage as seriously as they used to. Protestants certainly don't.
Yeah, it probably depends on the Protestants.
Most of them. It depends.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say that nobody takes it seriously, but it's not. We don't have crowning ceremonies. We don't consider it, a salvific path where you're dying to your own will, and the things that we say in the crowning ceremony. Andrew and I had one, and a lot of our friends have had them. So I've been to multiple crowning ceremonies now, and if you see the language and you hear the prayers and the symbolism of it, there's no other concept of marriage like that in the modern West today, I don't think. Most people treat it as kind of a roommate agreement where we're going to share some things, we're going to pay the bills together, we might have 1 or 2 kids, and, we'll mostly just sleep with each other, and that's about it. And it's as easy to break, maybe easier to break than your gym membership. You might have a harder time getting out of your 24-hour fitness contract for your gym than your marriage. So I think these are where the problems are. I don't think the problem was ever that women were so oppressed and had no choice.
Yeah.
I think that if you go back and read what women were writing at the time, women say, like Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony famously said in multiple places in their memoirs, in their speeches, in their history of women's suffrage, they say, our hardest task was getting women to go along with feminism. They didn't want it. They didn't like it. They already had almost everything they wanted. And they're writing this in the late 1800s, and they're saying women can go to school. Some of the first universities in this country were women's universities.
Yeah.
Women could work outside the home if they wanted to, but most didn't
Women
want
have
to.
always worked outside the home. I don't.
Yeah.
It's the weirdest thing to me when people have this idea that women didn't work outside the home. What are you talking about? It's like literally you read the women in Proverbs, and what it
Yes.
describes is not a woman that is like stuck in
Chained
her
to a
house.
stove.
That's
Right.
ridiculous.
No, and I always say if you're a wife and mother of a large family, to say that you don't work would be crazy, because it's definitely the busiest job I've ever had. Like podcasting, writing books, working in retail management when I was younger, doing hair, all the other things I've ever done. Not even close. Not even close to as hard and as much management skills and everything that it takes to be a wife and mom of a big family. But no, that all feminist argumentation reduces to framing. And they knew this, like Katie and Stanton knew this. They said, we can't get women to come along because they pretty much have everything they want. And they do have a lot of choice. And they can kind of do what they want. And everything's set up to privilege them. In fact, the anti-suffragist women in New York wrote like a pamphlet that I post all the time on X saying, we have all these privileges right now as women. And they listed them off. Things like they could go into a marriage with inheritance, like they could have land, money that they came into the marriage with, that the man couldn't touch without their permission under New York law. He couldn't sell their land, he couldn't spend their money, he couldn't do anything with it unless a judge was convinced that the woman was giving the man permission and that she was not under any sort of duress or coercion. And they said, look, if you make us equal with men, we're going to lose some of those privileges that protect us. Please don't do that. It'd be a terrible mistake. It's going to make mothers more vulnerable, not safer. They made these arguments. There was a huge membership in the women's anti-suffrage leagues, and they had very, very good points they articulated. And a lot of what I do is just bringing that back because they turned out to be right. So all the framing had to be, marriage is oppressive. It's a trap. Men are just waiting to abuse you. Men are just abusers who will get away with what they can get away with. And so if you don't have power, you will be abused, even by a seemingly good man. Or that, there's this secret patriarchy that wants to keep its boot on your neck and doesn't want you to be happy and wants you have movies like the Stepford Wives, right? Especially the original one. Men just want you to be a sex robot that makes them casseroles. That's secretly what they all want, and if they could get away with it, they would. So they had to create this framing to get women on board with this, because 100 years of the best feminist argumentation had only about 4% of women convinced that they needed the right to vote and that they needed no-fault divorce and all this other stuff.
Wow. Yeah, that's wild. So one of the things I'd like you to help me understand, because I have a kind of basic understanding of this myself from my own perspective, but one of the strangest things that's happened in the last 10 years is the destruction of the category of woman. And the perception that we have is that this destruction is being done by the same people, the same type of people, the same kind of continuation from the ones that brought feminism to us. And of course there are like a few turfs, like there are a few reactionaries in that world, but the main movement seems to be towards the and it really is the destruction of the category of woman. It's not the destruction of the category of man. For some reason, it's always in the space of women that they get kind of, that their spaces, that their categories get destroyed. And so what do you think? Like, why is this happening in your estimation?
I can tell you exactly why. So if you go back to the 1840s and read Margaret Fuller, who was the first widely published feminist author in America, she was writing about gender as a spectrum in the 1840s. And she was part of the Transcendental Club with Ralph Waldo Emerson and like that whole circle of intellectuals. And they had a very esoteric kind of proto-New Age religious outlook as well. And from her perspective, she was very monist. She thought that the only way we can return to the one or have perfect unity of all mankind will be to eventually abolish gender. And she's talking about this, 170 years ago. People think this is new. It's not new at all. And then again, during the Bolshevik Revolution, we had Alexandra Kollontai, who was Lenin's commissar for social welfare, one of the most powerful women in the world at the time, one of the first like really high-powered women in politics in the 1910s. And she wrote a piece called Soon in 50 Years' Time. And in that piece, she's imagining a post-communist world where we've defeated the capitalists. We no longer need a government. People don't even know what money is. And at that point, we can finally have the final revolution, which will be against biology. And it will be to eliminate gender, race, sex, all that stuff. So there's another common thread through all the writings of early feminists that actually, and it's very kind of, you could say it's Gnostic, you could say it's Luciferian, I guess. This idea that to be a woman is to be trapped, that it's a defect. They looked at womanhood and femaleness like a weakness, and that's what we see now. When
That's what I see. I've seen
Yeah.
that from the beginning of feminism, that in fact it seems like they do, even though they talk about the rights of women and they have this imagery, that in fact there's a kind of contempt for the
Yes.
feminine in there. And so it's like, but it's just wild. It's just difficult to put myself in the head of someone who gets there, you know?
Yeah. Well, it's when you read what they're writing, you can kind of follow the logic. Not that I agree, but when I read their actual writing and how they thought this through, you know, they're thinking to themselves, okay, if I go with this Marxist oppressor oppressed narrative, the only thing that matters, everything reduces to force. Women are never going to have a monopoly on force over men. Women have to carry the children, men don't. So that leaves you with just a couple of conclusions to come to if you wanted true equality. And what they mean is power. It always reduces to power dynamics.
Yeah.
You can disregard everything else they say. It comes down to power dynamics. So having to have the babies is something we need to get rid of. Women will never be free until they can, and you know, all the second wave abortionists said this. They said, you know, women will never be free until they can choose when and how they and if they will become mothers at all. So we don't like motherhood. We don't like being the ones that have to carry and birth and care for children. It's oppressive because when you're doing that, when you're pregnant, when you're nursing, you have to kind of rely on someone for protection.
Yeah, you're dependent.
And provision. So they're like, okay, that's oppressive. Motherhood is oppressing me. And in addition to that, me being smaller and weaker than men on average, and not being able to do the things that build and maintain the infrastructure of modern societies. Because there's a reason, people miss this all the time. There's a reason that feminism did not become a dominant political force until after the Industrial Revolution and then the technological revolution, because it's the only thing that kind of gave women this idea that they don't need men. Because now, you know, I have plumbing, I have Wi-Fi, I have electricity, I have a car that'll take me anywhere I want. There's all these roads that are just there. And most women my age and younger take that all for granted. Like a magical fairy just came and gave us all this stuff. Like we don't need men to build and maintain it so that we can even use it.
Yeah.
So the idea was we're going to get to a point where the men will do all this stuff, or technology will take over. You know, technology will take over, which my husband always debates against this idea that you're ever going to have robots that are pouring concrete or, you know, doing a lot of the difficult, dirty, dangerous jobs that keep infrastructure going. Robots aren't going to be building bridges. Certainly not anytime soon. There's just some things that only men can do, and they just happen to be the most essential things. So the writing always came to the conclusion that femaleness, being a woman, is the problem because it puts us in this position where we can't physically overcome certain things, and it makes us have to rely on men, and what we need is total independence from men. Now, that doesn't make sense because everyone's dependent on everyone. It's not like men don't also have to depend on each other, and you know,
Also,
that women and men don't need each other.
We absolutely need women. It's
Yeah.
It's in the Christian perception has always been complementarity. This is how we understand it. You know, it's not a one against the other. It's not one independent from the other. It's a form of complementarity. And so, I mean, I think that kind of helps me understand it. For sure, there's like a Luciferian for sure there's something about in some ways that there's a power in transing your children, for example, like that there's this power. It's a capacity to decide what the world is like, it's an expression of power. Because when you look at it, from with just a few steps removed, it's so weird. Like, it's so weird that, especially when you have these celebrities that have several, like, oh, what's the odds that if trans is actually a real human, like, normal phenomena, what's the odds that you have 2 or 3? That's
all your kids are trans.
Yeah, all your kids are trans.
Yeah. No, you hit the nail on the head. It's a desire to remake reality in your image. It's a complete and total rejection that there is a will of God that we should acquiesce to and submit to. So this is why also, for the women watching this, the word submission, it's like a Pavlovian conditioned response you have when you hear submit or submission, even if you're the most Bible-believing lady out there. You read, 1 Timothy 2:12, you read some of these verses that say things like the woman should obey or the woman should submit. It's like a knee-jerk reaction. It's almost uncontrollable. Like, you can't control hearing that word and associating it with, I'm not going to submit to any, I'm not going to obey. I'll obey if I think I need to obey. And it's like, why? Why do we have that knee-jerk reaction? And the reason is a century of billions of dollars worth of feminist propaganda training that into from the time you are little. If you go back and watch kids' cartoons, Disney movies, I've done a couple of analyses of some of these on my Substack. It's always the father is the bad, oppressive, overprotective guy, and the daughter is the smart, wise person who needs to strike out on her own and do her own thing and follow her own will. Like, if you look at The Little Mermaid or Mulan or a lot of these different Disney cartoons, there's this recurring theme, right? That you shouldn't submit to men or obey men, even if they're your father, even if they're your husband and they love you and they're willing to die trying to rescue you. You need to prove that you don't need them and that you can do it on your own and that you're independent from them so they can't control you. And to me, that's clearly a demonic trick. It's clearly a demonic trick to convince you that being able to bring life into the world is oppressive and it's holding you back. To convince you that the people in your life who have the most interest in loving and protecting you are actually there to oppress you. It's inversion, right? So this is all like very demonic inversion, and people don't know how deeply rooted into the culture it has become and how entrenched it has become in the last couple hundred years. And that's why in my book, I do take some time to go through things like the Second Great Awakening in the United States and the Enlightenment and like the milieu where these ideas came from so that people can tie some of these threads together and understand how we got here.
And so, I have 2 daughters. I grew up we were 3 guys, like three boys. And so I didn't have sisters. I didn't have a lot of experience with young girls until I had my own daughters. And, and I see the struggle, for example, like, I'm noticing that one of the issues, of course, for your daughter is that you want her to find someone that's the best for her.
Yeah.
And so that's when you also realize that it's like, well, maybe I do actually want my daughter to go to school, at least to some extent, because I want her to be able to be in a place where she will meet excellent people. Like, and I'm saying that in school is the only place where you can meet excellent people, but, there is obviously people that go to school, like, they have a certain level of dedication, like, you'll at least have the chance of meeting. So I'm trying to figure out, what I should encourage, how far should I encourage my daughters to go? And so I don't know, I'm just curious, like, what kind of advice you give to young, like, a 17-year-old girl?
So I have 4 daughters as well.
Okay.
And it is tough because we are in a system now where it's not like it was. My grandma is still with me. She's 100 years old. And she was really more like my mother and raised me more than my mother did, which is kind of why I think I have this fascination with history and this fascination with how were people thinking, like, prior to all of this, prior to the sexual revolution and the postmodernist stuff that we're in now. Like, what what did people think and what was the mindset and what was life about like back then? Because I grew up with someone who, both my grandmas, 1918 and 1926 is when they were born. So they were children of the Great Depression, the pre-World War II world is the world they grew up in. And I got to see a lot of that through spending so much time with them growing up. And I think in the age we're in now, it's like I said, women don't have a lot of options. So what do you do? Because are people ready to get married and start a family at 18, 20, or 22 years old now like they were when my grandma was 16 years old? She could already go out back, slaughter a chicken, pluck it, cook it for dinner. She had a little tobacco sales little thing on the side of the road by her house to try to earn extra money during the Great Depression. Like, she had helped deliver a couple of babies. By the time she was 16, the neighbor ladies, in labor, we got to go help her, with the baby. Totally different kind of life experience. And they were so much more grown up so much earlier. And then on top of that, you have a culture right now where good luck finding 18-year-old men who want to like marry and start a family that early, because we tell the men not to do that either. Everything is so backwards now that it's tough. So what I usually advise is this. I say, the culture is going to tell you to do things backwards. They're going to say, focus all your childbearing years on education and career, and then after you're through your childbearing years, then try to have a family. I always say you can kind of flip it. And I would tell young people to focus on finding a great spouse and starting a family younger. I do think you should do that. I'm not saying to be reckless about it. I'm not saying to just marry the first guy that comes along or whatever. I think it's better when you have your parents kind of involved and your parents are giving you some wisdom and guidance, because that's the traditional norm for all of human history, is that parents and family were very involved in courtship and helping young people find the right people to marry. So I think that's a good tip. And then there's things you can do. So say you get married at 22, 24, and you start a family. And hopefully you're going to start out with not a lot. You're not going to have a big fancy house. You're not going to have a big nest egg when you're young. But hopefully, as your family's growing, your husband's career is growing, maybe you can do some things from home on the side to help out a little bit in those early years when you have to. And then once your kids are older, they're like, how mine are grown up and moved out, except I have one left that's still high school age. You will have more time to do other things. You can, have a career. You can go back to school. There's a lot of things you can do if you want to as a woman. I would just say plan for doing those things a little later. And my best friend went to school while she was raising her kids, and she did it really slowly, part-time. And she got a master's degree in early childhood education. It took her about 10 years, but she didn't have to go into debt. She didn't have to leave her kids. And she just had an in-home daycare to help with. And no, I don't like daycare. I don't like the idea of daycare. I don't love it, but most people use it. And so for her if that's what her skill set is, and she can start a daycare to get herself and her family through. And now that her kids are grown up and moved out, she can work in a school. She can work with special education kids and things like that if she wants to. And she's got that set up for herself. So I think you have to be creative. We're in a place and time in society where it's going to take some creativity and some problem-solving skills, and it's not going to be perfect for most of us. Most of us are not going to get married to our high school sweetheart at 18 and have a perfect progression through life because of how things are. We're swimming upstream against a current that hates Christianity and hates the family and hates motherhood and does everything possible to discourage young people from that. So I think you can fight it. I think you can be successful, but you are probably going to have to get a little creative. And you may just have to switch up the order in which you do things. And if you do decide to go to school first, just try not to get yourself saddled with a huge amount of debt for a job that's not really going to make you any money, things like that.
Yeah, that's true. And I live in Canada, so it's not as crazy. You guys, with your college debt, you're so ridiculous. Like, people end up with like $100,000 or whatever. We homeschooled for a large part of our children's childhood, and we saw in the homeschool group, it was really amazing. Is there was something also about the homeschool groups and all the organization and everything that made the ladies that were there so kind of involved with each other and involved with the community that, like you said, when their kids reach like 10, 11, 12, they're starting businesses, they're doing all kinds of stuff. They're selling baby clothes. They have an online store, whatever. And you could just see it happen. It was just something that there's something about the energy that you need and the kind of, the kind of dedication that you put into your family when you're really involved that then also progresses into these outside places. And, what I've noticed, this has been my kind of theory, is that I might be wrong, but like, a husband can see, we're not idiots. Like, we can see how difficult it is, to be a young mother and to have children. Like, it's like this massive, huge effort. And at least in my case, like, this is my case, but I've seen it in others, is that, once now that my wife is kind of out of that stage, I want to make life great for her. Like, I don't want, like, I just want, I'm so grateful for how much sacrifice she put into my children that I want to make life as wonderful and as easy and as, as beautiful as we can handle. Obviously people have economic realities, but at least that's what I've seen. And so, I think that obviously if you're always fighting and you're always pulling the blanket and everybody, and everybody's trying to accuse the other of not doing what they're supposed to do, then maybe that won't be the case when you get to that second phase. But my sense is that in the natural order of things, that women put in a huge amount of like effort for a short amount of time.
Yes.
Then men put in like less effort, but over their entire life, basically, in terms of the what they put in, you could say.
That is exactly right. And that's exactly what I remember Andrew saying this to me. So there was a point where I had the fifth baby and I was, nursing her, and she was maybe a few weeks old. And at the same time, I had a friend whose husband had just passed away from cancer, and she had a baby the exact same age, only a few weeks old. So here she's going through mourning the death of her husband. She's got a newborn. She's alone. She's under tremendous stress, and she wanted to breastfeed. She didn't want to do formula, but she just couldn't do it. So I was pumping and sending her milk and feeding mine. So I'm sitting there with a baby on one side and a pump on the other, and I'm exhausted, and I've slept like maybe 2 hours. I'm just like, and Andrew was like, okay, I don't know how I'm going to do this, but you just need to stay home. Like, this is I can't ask you to work with everything that's going on with 5 kids. I don't know how I'll do it, but I'll figure it out. Because and he knew that's what I wanted too. And he did. Like, that man worked 60, 70-hour weeks for over a decade so that I could be home with the kids. He made tremendous sacrifice. And then once the newborn was a little older and I weaned her, then I went back to doing part-time stuff. Like on a Saturday, I got licensed as a firearms instructor and taught classes. So I could do a class and make like $1,200 in a day. And only have to be away from the kids for that one Saturday when dad's home. So like I said, you have to get creative. But I remember him saying to me, I know this seems really hard right now. And I know it feels like you have so much of the burden on you right now. But he's like, it's not going to last forever. They are going to grow up, and you're putting in all the hard work now on the front end. And he's like, I'm going to put in all the hard work on the back end so that in the second part of your life, like, you can really kick back. And that's what I want you to do. And he does that now, even now with me being older. He always is telling me, he's like, don't travel so much. You don't have to do every podcast. You don't have to do take more time to relax. Take more time to do things for yourself, because I'm not used to it. So now he almost has to push me to do it. But yeah, good husbands will move heaven and earth for their wives, especially when they see them, sacrificing and being good moms. And it's like, when you manage that part of marriage and you we both figured out how to put the other one first. Like many years ago, when our troubles kind of started to really improve, was when we both figured out that we had to put the other one first. Not really think about what am I getting out of it, who's doing more work, keeping score of, who's sacrificing more, who's working harder. Me just putting everything into making sure he's good, and him just putting everything into making sure I'm good. That works remarkably well. you're like on easy mode and you're in love and things are good. I don't know. That's my recommendation. I feel like that's where we got to a point where things really started getting good, was when we just shamelessly and ruthlessly put each other first.
Wow. Well, I think that's definitely great advice to end on. And so, Rachel, thanks for everything you do, and thanks for talking to me. And say hi to your husband for me, and hopefully we'll see you again soon. Thanks.
Thanks for having me.